kinds of contexts. That's why I put a globe up there. And in my professional life, I've experienced the importance of these issues while I was working in Germany, in Africa, in remote indigenous communities in the NT, and also in Nepal. And though the challenges and the issues affecting the first 1,000 days can be quite different in the different settings, but the importance really remains the same, and missed opportunities have very tragic lifelong consequences. So when I speak, I'll draw on personal experiences from different contexts. So what are the things that we are going to looking at tonight? So we're looking at what are actually the golden 1,000 days, why are they so significant? Some of the challenges that are there, obviously COVID comes in there as well, and then also look at interventions and solutions. And then I would also like to challenge you tonight. I don't know your motivation for registering to attend this webinar. I know a number of you, and I know a number of you are working in the maternal and child health area or early childhood sector, and you might have a professional or personal interest in this topic. I know some of you know me and might have just registered because you want to find out what I'm so passionate about. But I want to acknowledge that there's actually a lot of experience in this virtual room tonight. And I would like to challenge you to really listen with intent, with the intent to really produce your very own take-home message and to think what you want to do with the things that you hear about tonight. What spurs you on for action? What kind of action could you take, big or small? And maybe what you want to learn more about. So I would like you to listen with your ears, but also with your hearts and with your hand and feet. And we are scheduled, as Steve already said, we are scheduled a little bit of time at the end, and hopefully we will be able to have a little bit of conversation. If you have questions, note them down. You can ask them later on. But there will also be opportunity for you to share and to comment and to give your suggestions. Obviously, that's voluntary, and I don't want to scare anybody off, but I really want to encourage you to personally engage and reflect and learn, and then also share with us. So when we talk about the 1,000 days, it's better known actually as the first 1,000 days rather than the golden 1,000 days. We're talking about the time from pregnancy until the second birthday of a child, which is roughly 1,000 days. And you can see that here, when we talk about interventions, we very often divide the time a little bit different. So we talk about pregnancy, then very often we talk about the first 6 months of life, because some interventions are different there, and then the remaining time, but it adds up to about 1,000 days. So the first 1,000 days are a time of tremendous potential and at the same time really enormous vulnerability. And how well or how poorly mothers and children are nourished and cared for during this time has a profound impact on a child's ability to grow, to learn, and to thrive. And this is because the first 1,000 days are when a child's brain begins to grow and develop, and when the foundations for their lifelong health are also built. So several organizations throughout the globe have highlighted the importance of these 1,000 days. And in 2010, the 1,000 Days Initiative was born by several non-profit organizations with the backing of the US and the Ireland government. And the aim was to drive greater action and also investments to improve nutrition for women and young children throughout the world in those 1,000 days. And And what we can see here, I've just picked out a few logos. So different organizations, different countries have taken a slightly different focus and a different take on things and branded it also a little bit different. And as I said before already, the problems might be different, but no matter what context we are in, the first 1,000 days remain equally crucial. Now in Nepal, in April 2016, the government of Nepal, together with the EU and UNICEF, launched the National Golden 1,000 Days Awareness Campaign. So in most other countries, it's actually called, as you can see there, the first 1,000 days, but Nepal made it the Golden 1,000 Days. And I actually quite like that because it reflects something of how precious that time really is. So I want to show us a short clip that will touch on a few of the important issues that are relevant to the first 1,000 days and how brain development can be stimulated. I need to say, though, that this clip focuses mainly on the time after birth. So I assume it will work. If it doesn't, please let me know.
There is no period more critical in a child's development than the first 1,000 days of life. During this time, a child's brain can form up to 1,000 new connections every second. But these connections only come together when a child receives three things: nutrition, stimulation, and protection. Breastfeeding in the first 6 months is the best way to give a baby the nutrients she needs. Lack of loving care in the early years is a missed opportunity for brain development and can potentially have negative lifelong consequences. But when parents shower children with love, they thrive. Feeling safe and loved sparks brain connections, making it possible for babies to explore the world and learn from it. Playing, singing, reading, and talking with children helps them strengthen family bonds and form positive relationships. In the earliest years, most of the energy from food is used for brain development. Responding to a baby's cry, smile, or coo helps her to build communication skills and empathy. How children are cared for in the early years lays the foundation for their brain's architecture. Future health and happiness are shaped by a child's environment and experiences during the early years of life. Make the early moments matter for every child.
So this clip mentioned nutrition just very briefly. It just talked about breastfeeding in the first 6 months, but we'll talk a little bit more about nutrition later on. We've heard about stimulation and responsive parenting, love and care, and that important, as we've heard, cannot be underestimated. And obviously, if that is not happening, if there's no stimulation or responsive parenting, the brain development can be compromised. And we know from research that especially unpredictable behavior of the parent or the primary caregiver in those early years is very, very detrimental to attachment and has negative psychosocial consequences in the future. So when I talk about unpredictable behavior, what I mean is that, for example, the baby cries, wants to connect, and a positive response would be that the mother comes. And we saw that in the example, the mother came and connected and responded to the baby. And that obviously helps the baby to learn trust and helps those connections in the brain. And then we have another scenario where the baby tries to connect and there is no positive response or a negative response, maybe shouting at the baby or not even, you know, reacting to that, to the baby who wants to connect. And that's obviously not good, and teaching the children something that we don't want them to learn, you know, that they are on their own or that they're not listened to. But what is even more detrimental than a positive or negative response is an inconsistent or unpredictable response or behavior, meaning the baby tries or cries and tries to connect, and sometimes it gets a positive response and somebody comes and listens and smiles and talks to the baby, and other times that is not happening. So with that unpredictable behavior of the caregiver, the baby's brain is really, or the baby really gets confused, and it can't really learn from that, and a lot of the connections in the brain cannot form. And there's a lot of very interesting research done in this area of attachment, and if you're interested, I'd encourage you to look further into that. And these unpredictable responses can very often seen when the caregivers are suffering from mental illness or when they use alcohol and drugs. So these conditions can have a very negative consequence on the brain and development of the baby, and we really need to watch out for those scenarios. As I mentioned before, the clip did not talk much about pregnancy, and I just mentioned alcohol and drug use of the caregiver and what does that do to the child once the child is born. But obviously alcohol and drug use during pregnancy is also a very, very important topic. I won't really be able to go too much into detail here because we don't have sufficient time, but also this whole area is really so vast, and there is so much new research coming out all the time that I've not been able to keep up with that. But I know that there are people actually attending tonight who are quite experienced in that field. So if you have questions about that, I'm sure we'll be able to get them answered. But what we do know is that exposure to those toxins due to alcohol and drug consumption, starting actually from pre-pregnancy, then around the time of conception and also during pregnancy, have a very, very significant and negative impact on the healthy brain development and can lead to fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And I personally have a number of friends who are fostering children who suffer from fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and it's a very, very challenging and uphill battle. Really comes at a huge human cost, because it's really a lifelong condition that is characterized by severe neurodevelopmental impairment due to that exposure to alcohol during pregnancy. So alcohol consumption during pregnancy and uncontrolled use after birth is something with huge negative and irreversible consequences, and something we need to be aware of. In addition to those toxins due to alcohol and drugs, what we also now know from research is that if a mother is exposed to really high levels of stress during pregnancy, that can also have a negative impact on baby's brain and development. And these stresses can be related to all kinds of things: poverty, anxieties, financial worries, personal worries, being exposed to family violence, any of those things. And being under that stress leads to increased cortisol levels in the mother. That's the stress hormone, which then has detrimental impact on the baby. A little bit how that works, we'll look a bit closer at that later on. So during those 1,000 days, they are significant because the brain is built. We've heard a little bit about that. And it's also actually really, really important for the health, for the future health of the baby. We know now that undernutrition or malnutrition during pregnancy very strongly correlates with a significantly higher risk of developing non-communicable diseases later in life. Things like diabetes, kidney disease, heart disease, obesity. And we can actually see quite a sharp rise of those conditions also in low and middle income countries. So poor nutrition in pregnancy can lead to low birth weight babies and poor nutrition in the early years, causing malnutrition, and that can lead to lifelong health problems. This is really, really significant. And I remember back when I did my midwifery studies, which is many, many years back, maybe 30 years back, we actually just talked about a hypothesis because we were thinking that was the case, but we weren't really, science wasn't really sure. But now, of course, that has all come a long way, and it's now proven that there is this strong connection and correlation. So when we look at preventative strategies for these chronic conditions that cause so much suffering and cost so much money as well, then we actually have to go all the way back and start with nutrition in pregnancy, because that is where those foundations are laid. And we'll look at in a minute at why it's not just preventative measures for health in life, but also actually for addressing poverty. So when we look at building healthy brains, building health, of course that leads to a healthy and fair start in life, and also prosperity. And we'll just have a look at this little infographic there. I really like that. It's very, very powerful. So we know now that children who get the right nutrition in their first 1,000 days are 10 times more likely to overcome the most life-threatening childhood diseases. Excuse me. So obviously they are more healthy, their body defense works a lot better, and they are more likely to really withstand any of those life-threatening illnesses. And because of that, we also know that children who receive the right nutrition in those 1,000 days, on average, complete 4.6 more grades of school, because they are well, they can go to school, they can learn well, they enjoy learning. And that leads then on to them earning about 21% more wages as adults, leading on to having are more likely as adults to have healthier families. So this is really, really significant and very, very powerful, and shows us that if we get those 1,000 days right, we can, I guess, make up for a lot of lost time and address a lot of things. So very, very briefly, only very briefly, because I don't really know very deeply about this, but we want to have a look at epigenetics. This is an evolving science. My knowledge is limited, but it is very, very exciting and worth mentioning. And I also encourage you to do some further research yourself in that area if you're interested. So epigenetics is a study of how our behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect the way our genes work. So epigenetic changes do not change the DNA sequence itself, but they can change how the body reads a DNA sequence. So turning certain parts off and on. And science is just really beginning to understand that interplay between the genes and the environment and how that affects lifelong health. And we know that our DNA is pre-programmed, obviously, that we receive from our parents, the DNA, but nutrition and other environmental and lifestyle factor can actually alter the way in which our DNA is expressed. And the first 1,000 days is a particularly critical period which can alter a young child's biology. And in fact, a person's cells are effectively programmed in childhood for how they will respond to their environment throughout the remainder of their life. And there's also now evidence that suggests that some epigenetic changes can even be passed down from one generation to the next. So in this way, what a child experiences in her first 1,000 days may impact not only her own development and health throughout her life, but also potentially that of her children as well. And there's also more and more growing evidence and research that suggests that heart disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, and behavioral health problems may have their origins in epigenetic changes during pregnancy, and that nutrition plays a key role in these. And there's actually a very interesting example that looking at a famine that was in the Netherlands in 1944 and 1945. So there were people whose mothers were pregnant during that time of famine, and they were more likely to develop certain diseases. In that example, it was heart disease, schizophrenia, and type 2 diabetes. And in the early 2000s, so 60 years after the famine, researchers looked at the methylation levels in people whose mothers were pregnant during the famine. And these people had increased methylation at some genes and decreased methylation at other genes compared to their siblings who were not exposed to the famine before their birth. And these differences could help explain why these people had an increased likelihood for certain diseases later in life. And as I say, this is all really evolving and new science, and it will be interesting to watch that and the implications for that. So we talked about nutrition, and when we talk about nutrition, we also need to talk about malnutrition. And malnutrition, child malnutrition rates are really globally at crisis levels, and I've just put up there two numbers. So 2.6 million children die every year with the underlying cause of malnutrition. So they're malnourished as an underlying cause and they die. And in addition to those 2.6 million, there is about 1 million children that survive but will have lifelong impairments. So there are different forms of undernutrition. So malnutrition itself, the word malnutrition, can mean overnutrition or undernutrition, just not the right nutrition. But when we look at undernutrition, there are different types. So there's one type that we call wasting. So the children are defined as wasted and in need of treatment when they have a low weight for their height. Low weight for their height, or when they have a small mid-upper arm circumference. And when we do large-scale community nutrition assessments, that's usually what we use. We measure the mid-upper arm circumference And if that is below a certain centimeters, then we know that there is acute undernutrition. So small mid-upper arm circumference and low weight for height indicate acute malnutrition. And then we have something else that is called stunting. And children are defined as stunted if they have a low height for their age. So they are shorter than they should be for their age. And which really indicates chronic malnutrition. So we don't just have the acute malnutrition, which we can possibly treat, but this ongoing malnutrition actually leads to the child not growing in height as it should, and lost potential that will never be able to be gained back. So the most severe and long-term undernutrition is stunting, that is impaired growth and development that children experience from poor nutrition, and poor nutrition then leading to repeated infections and all those things. So when we look at that map, it didn't come out very clearly, but what it shows is the percentage of children under the age of 5 who are moderately or severely stunted. As I said, stunted, the most severe undernutrition. And the countries in dark red is where over 40% of children are moderately or severely stunted. And we see, for example, when we talked about Nepal before, Nepal is part of that. And so that's really a serious statistic. And as you can see, that was a statistic from the WHO in 2018. And as we all know, the corona pandemic has just made things even worse. And it really reflects these children not growing well, reflects missed potential for that individual child, for that family, but also for the community, for that country, and for the world. So let's take some time and look at some of the interventions or solutions that that can be worked on. So number one here is improve women's health and nutrition. And ideally, we'll have healthy adolescents already, girls that are not getting married very early, girls that are well nourished and not malnourished, educated, girls that grow up free from violence, and when they get pregnant, that there are health services available for them, that there are sufficient micronutrients, and in pregnancy that's specifically iron and folate and iodine, a healthy diet, no toxins, no smoking and no drinking. So that would be our aim, to really increase the investments in women's education, health, nutrition, empowerment and well-being. Then the next one is increased breastfeeding support, and we could have a whole workshop just on breastfeeding because it's so important. But what we aim for is exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months as the best nutritional start for a child while the mom eats a healthy diet, and breastfeeding even after 6 months to go on when other food is introduced. And it's very sad to see that that a lot of countries that used to have very high exclusive breastfeeding rates are now going down. That is quite sad to see, and in a lot of places it's considered in or modern to bottle feed, and certainly the infant formula industry has a lot to answer for. So what we are looking at here is not just supporting individual mothers who want to breastfeed, but also to look at what kind of policies and frameworks would be needed to encourage that. You know, things like maternity leave provisions, that enable women to breastfeed their babies. In Germany, for the last 25 years, we have the option of parental leave for up to 2 years, really acknowledging the importance of those 2 years, and fathers and mothers can actually switch during those 2 years. So policies like that would be very important. Then obviously we'd also aim at good diets for babies and toddlers, and making sure we promote the right weaning food, have the right variety of food frequency as well, and healthy feeding practices and hygiene. And when we look at Nepal, obviously not just twice a day dal bhat like adults eat, but really food that has a lot more variety, is fed a lot more frequency, and food preparation and feeding hygiene and also practices. Then what is very important, who is looking after our children and feeding our children? What we can see in a lot of countries is that older siblings, there can be a 5-year-old sister who is looking after the baby and feeding the baby. And obviously that will not have the desired outcomes, because she obviously is a child herself and shouldn't be really left with the responsibility to look after another child. And we also want to make sure that children and toddlers have the right micronutrients. Anemia in children is also quite common around the world and really responsible for a lot of lost potential, because that leads very often to poorer school performance and those things. And vitamin E is quite important as well. And one other thing for the first 2 years related to nutrition is also that during the first 2 years, the taste preference actually develops. So what I mean by that is that whatever we expose our 2-year-olds with in terms of taste and consistency of food will shape their preference in the future. So if we expose that child, for example, to a lot of sweet things in those first 2 years, that preference for sweetness is more likely to continue. So it's quite important and very interesting research in that relation as well. And then as the last one here is that we also really need to ensure that we have increased investments in children and families, and especially supporting the most vulnerable babies, toddlers, and their families to get the food, the nutrition, the support, getting out of poverty, getting the support that they need to thrive. And that, that ties in there as well is teaching about responsive parenting, nurturing the children, giving them the love and a safe and caring environment that they need to grow up, and also to remove stressors and address issues such as family violence and poverty. So as you can see, there are a lot of things, but actually none of them are really high-tech interventions or solutions. It's not rocket science. There's no complicated machines that we need, and not even very complex skills that we need to address those things. But what it really needs is engagement and collaboration and commitment and political will as well. So I'm certainly not an economist, but there are some issues that are really worth mentioning as they can be stumbling blocks in advancing some of the agenda that we just talked about. And in terms of cost, if we miss the opportunities, there is a huge human cost with people being sick and enormous suffering and lost potential. But if we ignore investing in the first 1,000 days, there's also a huge economic cost, as we have seen before. You know, people, and maybe I just go back to this. You know, there's global nutrition targets that have been set, and that is eliminate stunting, wasting, increase breastfeeding, and addressing anemia. And to do that, quite a bit of investment is needed. It's not for free, it is needed. But if we address those things, we're looking at healthy children, healthy women, good cognitive development, good education, productivity as adults, earning money, and actually really contribute better and more to the economy. So during my times in Central Australia, I was part of rolling out a project called the Australian Nurse Family Partnership Project. And we were working with vulnerable pregnant women from pregnancy. Women had to sign up during pregnancy until the second birthday of her child. And it was a very intensive home visitation program. So we visited the mum and her family every week for over 2.5 years. Sorry, every month, not every week, every month for the 2.5 years. But at certain periods, we also went weekly, like for the first 6 weeks after birth and something like that. So the work involved really encouraging healthy pregnancy with healthy nutrition, addressing substance abuse, family violence, poverty. And then we also worked a lot after the child was born with teaching responsive parenting, and also capacity building of the mother to achieve her personal goals. And this project, which came as a pilot project to Australia in 2009, was based on work that had been done in the US for about 40 years. And there was really strong evidence, and there was a lot of research when that was set up in the States. And because it had been done 40 years before, they had been following those children that were involved in that project with those same interventions. And they looked at the outcomes, and they had large randomized control trials and looked at the outcomes at 15 years, at 20 years, and at 25 years after those children had been part of that project. And the outcomes were just amazing, because there was significantly, those children compared to the children in the control group, and we are talking about, 20,000 children being part of those studies. They were significantly more healthy, had less chronic diseases, they had attained higher education levels, there were higher employment rates of those children, less mental health issues, and even less involvement in the criminal justice system of those children who had been born to those vulnerable mothers. So the program was not cheap to run, because it's a very intensive home visitation program, but there was a lot of studies and research also done at the investment, and it was very, very clearly showing manifold returns for the money that had been invested. So I think the math is really clear if we look at those things. So prevention is not necessarily cheap, so there needs to be an investment to start up with, but it's certainly cheaper in the long run, and the investments will reap huge and manifold financial benefits, the investments in the golden 1,000 days. So why is it so difficult to get political will and investment in those issues? I think one issue is that with investing in the golden 1,000 days, you spend your money today, but the financial benefits will only be seen in maybe 15 years' time or 20 years' time, when that child is not developing a chronic condition or some of the other things. So there can be a very, very long time until this return is seen, and that is very often not very attractive to politicians. They want to spend their money on things where they can see the results pretty quick, maybe as long as they are in power, so that they can, you know, claim those benefits and for their own political agenda. So that is why it is sometimes difficult to really gain that interest. Thankfully for our project that we are running in Central Australia, the impact and the outcomes and the economic value was really clear, and that project gained bipartisan support, and that actually led to the project being funded, and it's rolled out on a wider scale in Australia at the moment. So let's just look at some of the challenges that we are facing, and I think to me, and hopefully to you as well, the cause is really clear that investing in the Golden 1,000 Days makes total sense, but what are some of the obstacles that are there? So the big C, or the COVID pandemic, obviously has made the situation worse for women and for children, not because of them being infected by COVID, but just because things like increased poverty, hunger, malnutrition affects them the most. And there's a lot of stress and anxiety about being afraid of getting the disease and being in lockdown. And we have seen really data from across the world says that there is increased violence against women and children during lockdown and this crisis. And that what we also see, obviously, health services are disrupted because of lockdown. Women can't go for antenatal care because they might not be able to get out and get around. They might not be able to get their iron supplements that they need to take in pregnancy and things like that. And then also funding, obviously, is diverted towards COVID response and might be taken away from some of the other real essential services that would be needed. So the situation that maybe has been decreasing over decades is certainly a lot of those gains have been lost. Then what we also see is that maternal and child health is not so much in fashion anymore with a lot of funding partners. 20, 30 years ago, it was a big thing to do, to invest in maternal and child health, and we have achieved a lot of things with immunization coverage, with antenatal care, and all of those programs. But we have seen that interest fading away a little bit, and other things seem to be more on the agenda of a lot of funding partners. And one very big issue also is that the question is who should make the investment? Should it be health? Should it be education? Should it be agriculture? Should it be development? So what we really need, because it's such a multifaceted issue, that we really need a multisectoral approach, and also multisectoral funding and coordination that we really need, leading to that holistic development, addressing a lot of those different factors. And one very difficult thing or challenging thing is also that if we invest and advocate for women and children in a lot of cultural contexts, we are actually challenging cultural norms, because we are really trying to give the most attention to who is the weakest, you know, in the eye of people. Like in the Nepal context, it's the youngest daughter-in-law who does the work, who does a lot of the housework, who is responsible for a lot of the agriculture work, but she would be the last one to eat. So if we really invest and advocate and speak up for investment into the Golden 1,000 Days, we're actually challenging some of those norms, and that is always difficult. But challenges are there to be overcome, and we really want to turn them into stepping stones and not stumbling blocks. And I believe all of us can play our part. And I'm looking at the time. I've invited you at the beginning, and I would like us to now use the remainder of the time to really start a conversation about your responses to what you have heard tonight, any questions that you might have, any comments, anything that has challenged you, and really to think about and maybe to share also how you could become part of the solution and ensuring that this time of tremendous potential and enormous vulnerability is utilized to achieve the best outcomes. So before we open the microphones, I just want to play a short clip that recaps some of the information from tonight, and then after that, I will hand back to Stephen. Thank you. And over to Steve. I think I'll stop sharing my screen, even though I really like this many responses here, but yes.
Okay, thank you, Inge. There's lots of stuff to think about there. We've got maybe 10 minutes for a bit of discussion, so please, everyone, if you want to unmute yourselves and unmute your camera and just throw it open to, is there anybody who has any questions or comments arising from what Inge's just presented to us? And if you have a question, then we don't have to have the traditional minute of silence, just jump in.
I've just sent a question in the chat to Inge.
Let me just have a look. Why do you think there's less interest from the large funding partners in MNCH, particularly bilateral donors, which is where the big funding comes from? Is it because the results are not seen quickly enough? Is funding the main issue? Or if not, what do you think is the #1 barrier to change? Maybe using Nepal as an example. Oh, Stephen. This is really open to anybody who might have something to contribute. But I think one big factor is that, you know, as I've pointed out, that it's a very long-term investment, and results are seen far down the track, and that is very often not very attractive. But I think also what is important is that what I mentioned, that really multi-sectoral approach, that not one area can do it on their own. It really needs to come together because it's a very, very complex issues that are there. you know, and agriculture needs to play a role, and health and education, everybody really needs to come together. And that is very difficult to coordinate, and nobody really wants to shoulder that burden on their own, I guess. But I'm interested in your thoughts as well.
This may not be a deep response, but we don't need deep. Just that whole, coming back to that thought about every person having that intrinsic value. And you, Inge, you touched on, in certain cultures, there's less value placed on women and on children. And of course, we know that historically that's basically been the story of the world. But yeah, I guess one way of doing it across all sectors is to help each other to understand just that incredible value that each person has. And of course, that comes back to beliefs. But despite cultural differences and even religious differences, I still see that there's hope for that, regardless of, you know, we might think of Nepal and caste systems and gender challenges there. But I guess we have hope, especially in the gospel, that that God presents us with that message of every person, every life having that value. And from that gives me, I suppose, a push to do something about that, even in the smallest of ways.
Yes, thank you very much. Very, very important. Yeah.
I don't know if you got anything to add, Inge, on this one, but it just struck me, you know, when you showed the map of undernutrition, and there was Nepal was one of those red sections. And for people who are in Nepal or been to Nepal, you realise there's obvious geographical and cultural and climate kind of barriers now to every baby or every child in Nepal getting decent nutrition. What's the way forward with that? How do you deal with that? It's not just a matter of throwing dollars at things. There's historical, cultural reasons that agriculture happens the way it does, and maybe that's not a health thing. Maybe that's a broader development question. Do you have anything to say about that from your experience in Nepal?
So I think that holistic development, it all needs to come together. It can't be one silo that we work on and try to address. And I think I really value what Sarah said. You know, having that compassion and that change of mind is something that will also motivate people. That maybe traditionally we haven't really seen that much. But I'd be interested to hear from people like Nalom. I don't know whether you have any comment on that as somebody who is very much involved in that kind of environment in Nepal and from Nepal.
Okay. Sorry, Inge, I was just feeding my little one at the same time to you. So
I really like that. You're just making sure that little man is well nourished in his golden 1,000 days. Thank you.
Yes. So I need to catch up with your thing, because I was just listening some bits, and your part when you just mentioned my name. Oh, I was just alert.
So sorry about that.
Yeah.
So Steve, can you just go?
Yeah.
Sorry, dropped out there. Is that just my question?
Yes. Steve, can you repeat once again that part? Because I was feeding and then listening some bits.
Well, just if you got any insight into, you know, when we talk about the importance of nutrition, and there's so many factors in Nepal, especially in some of the more remote places, that make it very difficult for pregnant women and for babies to get the nutrition they need. Some of the things
Yeah.
that organisations can do to try and make that happen.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, in Nepal, there are various factors which I think just makes difficult, or there are some challenges at the same time. When we see like Nepal has got more of patriarchal thing, and then most its cultural things are also related, especially in pregnancy, after pregnancy, when we see there are some religious cultures thing which has to, where a woman has to follow. For example, up to like 11 days until there is a traditional thing like naming of a child, then they have to live separately or secluded from the family. So it's kind of like a chaupadi culture where one has to stay in a like a separate room or a shed. But you know, after delivery also there is kind of tradition for women. So in those kinds of little practices, but at the same time when we see there are some practices which also encourages people, women to, for example, like during the 45 days after the delivery, then the women can go to a maternal place. So that also encourages. So there's practices both which hinders, but at the same time, some key practices are also there, which also helps.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We are running out of time now. Has anyone else got any last minute questions or thoughts or reflections?
I just want to say also, Inge, thank you for sharing the information just about how important it is responding to a child, not only nutrition and, you know, those sorts of physical things, but just the emotional and relational development, the social development of a child, and how important that time is. It just made me think about the work that I'm doing with people who are in the homelessness sector in Australia, and often they don't have the capacity to give that responsiveness to their children because they're going through such stress and crisis themselves. But yeah, just helps me to, just reminds me that somehow or another we can do better, yeah, in supporting them.
We might have to wrap it up. Thank you so much again, Inge, for putting that together and for presenting it so well. And there's probably going to be some other thoughts and follow-up questions and things. Please get in touch if you have anything that you'd like us to pass on to Inge. Just to recap that we'll make the recording available soon, and that will also, there'll be a kind of resources document, and Inge might share us her PowerPoint with us as well. So I'll be in touch about that. And I'm also going to send out an email when we've finished. If people have the energy while it's fresh in your mind, just to quickly get follow a link and give a bit of feedback about this webinar, so that we know how we can improve on them in the future. That would just take a minute or two to do. So it'd be wonderful if you could do that when that email comes around as well. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. And I just wanted to let you know about a couple of things, actions that you could follow up if you wanted to almost straight away. You might have just seen her sitting next to me. No, that's not the right screen. I'll try again. I'm not finding it. I know why. I've got the wrong window open. Bear with me, folks. There it is. Can people see that? There's just a website called FAIR. if you're in Australia and you want to do something, one of the biggest things is, and Diana, who sits next to me, is an occupational therapist. She works with kids who have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, FASD. There's quite a campaign at the moment to try and get our governments to actually increase the amount of labelling on alcohol. And obviously the alcohol industry is very keen to play that down. But we know we're trying to get governments to actually say that there's no safe level of alcohol consumption when you're pregnant. So if you wanted to get onto fare.org.au, F-A-R-E, you can actually sign an open letter to get some action on alcohol labelling. So that's just one example of something you could do. I also just want to show you a little bit about what INF is doing. inf.org.au is our website. And if you get onto the website and have a look at the donate tab, one of our main programs that people, if they want to contribute regularly to INF, and especially as Inge talked about, a sort of multidisciplinary approach, it's a whole of community approach. We run a program called Journey with Joomla, where you can commit to regularly donating to our development work in Joomla district. It's a fairly remote district in Western Nepal. So if you're willing to support that regularly, you can also get all sorts of information about what's going on there, regular updates, a little bit of video stuff that's quite inspiring, quite a lot of resources there that you can actually kind of do a little longitudinal study and contribute to something and learn about what's going on there over a series of years. So I'd recommend that you check out Journey with Joomla. The other thing is we started off by talking quite a lot about COVID-19 and what's going on around the world. Obviously, it's hit Nepal and is hitting Nepal very strongly, and the news from Nepal keeps getting more and more distressing. So if you wanted to donate some money to our coronavirus appeal, that would be fantastic. There's two ways you can do that. You can just make a donation yourself, just on the website. Well, we're also running a program called Go the Extra Mile. So if you go to fundraising, and if you have a group of friends or yourself, if you are either planning on already doing a walk or a ride or something, or you want to organise something, we can set you up with a peer-to-peer fundraising page. And that's very easy to do. It doesn't require much more than just sending a link to people via email or on social media, and they can donate, they can support you in raising funds for Nepal, and every little bit helps. So I just want to recommend those possible actions if you're looking for something that can make a difference right now. And that's enough marketing from me. So I might just pray and then we'll finish up. So if you can join me.
We might just mention, Steve, that, that there will also be a resource list available with some links to some of the research that I mentioned that will come around, I think, with the link to the recording in a few days. Yeah,
it'll be coming out in a couple of days once we get that all uploaded of the website, etc. Okay, can I pray? Father God, help us to respond to what we've learned from Inge, such an important issue in so many ways, so simple to solve, but you know, we make it so difficult. We just pray that governments, that development organisations, churches, individuals who hear this message will be able to respond. Help us to think how we can respond. That might be with people we know who are pregnant now. That might be through supporting organisations that are doing the sort of development work that supports women, pregnant women and young children. Help us as the church, as your body, to respond and to want to make a difference. Thanks for this time. Be with us all as we go. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, thank you, Inge, again. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Namaste.
I don't know what time it is in your part of the world. It's getting quite late here in Eastern Australia. So thank you, and we'll see you again. Well, this is the last webinar for 2020, but I'm sure there'll be more in 2021 for those people who aren't completely zoomed out by then. So hopefully we can see you. In the meantime, hope you have a fantastic Christmas, and all the best for the rest of 2020. God bless.
Thanks, Inge. Thank you.